I held my baby once. Just once. Long enough to feel her tiny fingers curl around my thumb like she already knew the shape of my love. Her skin was warm and milk-sweet, her breath soft against the hollow of my throat. I remember the way the hospital room sounded that morning. Plastic curtains whispering when nurses passed, the steady beep of a monitor, and somewhere down the hall, a woman laughing like life was still simple. Then I handed her to the woman I trusted most. Her name was Marissa Cole, and she stood beside my bed with her arms already out, eyes wet, mouth trembling into a smile that looked like prayer. Marissa wasn't family by blood, but she had been stitched into every important part of my young life. College mornings with burnt coffee, the first apartment that smelled like fresh paint and cheap shampoo, late-night talks where we promised each other we'd never let life make us hard. When I placed my baby into her arms, Marissa didn't hold her like a stranger would. She held her like she'd been waiting her whole life. Like the child belonged there. And I let her. I can still see myself in that moment, 26 years old, hair pulled back in a tired knot, hospital bracelets sliding on my wrist. I looked calm from the outside. I even managed a smile. But inside, something was cracking open, quietly, like ice under a careful footstep. If you've ever carried a secret that felt heavier than your own bones, you know what I mean. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever loved someone so much you made a choice that hurt you, just tap that like button so I know I'm not alone in this story. Because back then, I truly believed I was doing the most loving thing I could. I lived in Savannah, Georgia at the time, in a narrow little rental house with creaky floors and a porch that leaned slightly to the left, as if the whole place was listening in. The neighborhood was quiet, old oaks, Spanish moss, the scent of damp earth after rain. At night, the streetlights made the sidewalks look like long, pale ribbons. My husband, Daniel, was the kind of man people trusted on sight. He had an easy voice, a steady handshake, and a way of looking at you like he already understood. We met at a charity event. Marissa dragged me along, insisting I needed a life outside my job and my worries. Daniel worked in finance, clean shirts, polite laughter, always talking about plans. He proposed after 9 months, under a gazebo wrapped in white lights, and Marissa cried harder than I did. We were the kind of couple people smiled at. The kind of couple older women at church would nudge each other about, whispering, "That's a good man she got." And for a while I believed it. Marissa was my best friend, but she was also our constant. Sunday dinners, holiday mornings, last-minute babysitting for other people's kids because Marissa had always had that soft spot, that maternal patience. The only thing she didn't have was a child of her own. She'd tried, of course. Years before I got pregnant, she had miscarried, quietly, painfully, and with a dignity that made my chest ache. She never talked about it much, but sometimes I'd catch her staring at baby clothes in a store window like she was remembering something she couldn't touch anymore. When I found out I was pregnant, she hugged me for so long I had to remind her to breathe. "You're going to be a mama," she whispered into my hair. "Oh, honey. You're going to be a mama." Daniel was thrilled. At least, that's what he showed the world. He kissed my forehead, bought a little pair of baby shoes, set them on the kitchen counter like a promise. He told everyone at work. He told our pastor. He told his mother, who immediately started talking about names and baptism. But there were tiny things, even then. Little shifts I didn't know how to hold. Sometimes Daniel would go quiet when the baby topic came up, just a second too long. Sometimes he'd drink more than usual, not sloppy, just distant. And there were nights he stayed late at work and came home smelling like something sharper than office air. I blamed stress. Men got nervous, I told myself. Fatherhood was big. Life was big. Then my pregnancy turned complicated. It started with swelling in my feet that never went down, headaches that felt like a tight band around my skull. The doctor started using words like monitoring and risk. By the 7th month, I was in and out of the hospital, listening to nurses talk softly while they adjusted my fore. Daniel sat beside my bed like a dutiful husband, scrolling through his phone, answering calls he always stepped out to take. Marissa, on the other hand, stayed. She brought homemade chicken soup in a thermos, the kind my own mother used to make. She rubbed lotion into my hands when my skin got dry from all the washing. She made me laugh, even when I didn't feel like I deserved laughter. One afternoon, when the rain was tapping against the hospital window and the room smelled like antiseptic, Marissa leaned close and said, "If anything happens, if you need me, I'm here. You know that, right?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes were afraid. I squeezed her fingers. Nothing's going to happen. But I was lying. The truth is, I had already started to feel it. Something sliding out of place in my life, something I couldn't stop with prayer or denial. Because the first real clue didn't come from Daniel. It came from a paper I wasn't supposed to see. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the hospital cafeteria had mashed potatoes that tasted like glue, and I joked to Marissa that they should be illegal. She laughed, then stepped out to take a call. Daniel had gone to get some air, which usually meant he was outside pacing with his phone. A nurse came in with a folder and set it on the end of my bed. "Doctor will be back shortly," she said, then left. The folder was half open. My name was on it. So was Daniel's. And underneath, clipped behind the top sheet, was a lab report with a word that snagged my eye like a thorn. Paternity. At first, my brain didn't even understand what it was looking at. I stared at the letters, slow and confused, like I was reading a language I used to know. Then the meaning dropped into me, heavy and sudden. Why would there be a paternity test? My hands started to shake. Not dramatic shaking, just a tremble in my fingertips like my body was trying to warn me. I slid the paper out carefully, as if the sound of it might wake someone. The results were printed in cold black ink. Percentages. Scientific certainty. The kind of truth that doesn't care how much you cry. And there it was. A statement so clean it felt cruel. Probability of paternity. 0%. I remember the way my throat tightened, like I had swallowed something sharp. I remember the pressure behind my eyes. I remember how the room suddenly felt too bright, too loud, even though nothing had changed. Daniel wasn't the father. I sat there with the paper in my hands, listening to the monitor beat behind me, steady as a heartbeat that didn't know it was breaking. My first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Because I hadn't cheated. Not once. Not ever. I had lived my life with rules I thought would protect me. Faithfulness, honesty, decency. I had been proud of that. I had built my marriage on it. So how could that be true? Then my second thought came, quiet and terrifying. Unless someone else made sure it was true. My stomach rolled. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the baby shift inside me like she was trying to find safety in the wrong place. When Daniel walked back in, he was smiling. Small, casual. "Hey," he said. "Doctor says you're stable. That's good." I didn't speak. I just held the paper up. His smile vanished. For a long moment, he stared at it like it was a weapon. Then he looked at me, really looked, and something in his eyes changed. Not guilt. Calculation. "Where did you get that?" he asked, too calmly. "It was in my folder," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like it didn't belong to me. "Daniel, why is there a paternity test?" He swallowed. His jaw clenched. "It's standard sometimes, when things get complicated." "No," I said, and I surprised myself with the steadiness of that one word. "That's not true. Don't lie to me." His eyes flicked toward the door, like he was checking if anyone could hear. Then he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Ellie," he said, my name like a warning, "don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. As if my life wasn't already splitting in two. I stared at him, and suddenly I saw something I hadn't wanted to see for years. The way his kindness always had conditions. The way his calmness could turn sharp when he wasn't being watched. The way he liked control more than he liked love. My mouth went dry. "What did you do?" He didn't answer right away. He just exhaled, long and slow, like he was tired of pretending. Then he said something that still makes my stomach twist, even now, decades later. "I needed it to be true," he murmured. My whole body went cold. "What?" He rubbed his forehead like he was the one suffering. "My mother. The trust. The family name. You don't understand how it works. If that baby was legally mine, everything changes. Everything. And with your medical issues, I couldn't take the risk." I stared at him. Risk of what? His eyes held mine, steady and awful. Risk of losing what's mine. I felt like I was floating above my own body. Like I was watching a woman in a hospital bed, watching her husband explain, without actually saying the words, that he had arranged a paternity test, and somehow made sure the result would sever the baby from him. I didn't know how. I still don't know the exact mechanics of it, and in some ways, it doesn't matter. Because the truth was clear in his posture, his tone, his confidence. He had moved pieces behind my back. And he had planned to let me carry the consequences. My hands were numb. "You're saying, you wanted the test to say she wasn't yours." He didn't deny it. He just said, "You're emotional. You're sick. Let's talk when you're calmer." That's when Marissa walked back in. She stopped in the doorway, sensing it immediately. "What's going on?" Daniel turned to her like he was flipping a switch. His face softened. His voice warmed. "Nothing," he said. "Ellie's just overwhelmed." Marissa came to my bedside, her gaze moving between us. "Ellie." I looked at her. My best friend, my sister in everything but blood, and I wanted to crawl into her arms like a child. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to scream. But Daniel was standing there, watching me, watching her. And the baby inside me kicked, hard, as if reminding me what I had to protect. I folded the paper slowly, my fingers clumsy, and I slid it back into the folder like I could hide reality by tucking it away. "I'm tired," I whispered. "That's all." Marissa's eyes didn't believe me, but she nodded gently anyway. "Okay, honey. Rest. I'll stay." Daniel lingered a moment longer, then leaned down and kissed my forehead. Soft, performative. "We'll be fine," he said. The moment he left, The room felt like it could breathe again. Marissa sat in the chair beside my bed, hands folded in her lap. "Ellie, talk to me." I stared at the ceiling, blinking back tears I refused to let fall. "I can't," I said. "Not yet." Because the truth was starting to form inside me, dark and complete. Daniel was going to leave. And when he did, he was going to make sure my baby and I had nothing. I turned my head toward Marissa and watched her, the way her foot tapped slightly when she was nervous, the way her fingers worried the edge of her sweater. She loved me. I knew she did. And she wanted a child more than she'd ever said out loud. A terrible thought came to me then. Not like a plan, not yet. More like a door cracking open in a burning house. What if my baby could be safe with her? What if the only person I trusted enough to hold my child was the very person who could never know why I was handing her over? My throat tightened around a sob. Marissa leaned forward. "Ellie, please. You're scaring me," I whispered, so quiet it barely made sound. "If something happens, if I can't, will you promise me something?" Her face softened. "Anything." I looked at her. Really looked at her. And in that moment, I saw my daughter's future like a fragile glass in my hands, either shattered by Daniel's control or carried gently by Marissa's love. "Promise," I said, voice breaking, "that you'll always keep her safe. No matter what." Marissa's eyes filled. She reached out and clasped my hand. "I promise," she whispered, "with my whole life." And I believed her. But I didn't tell her the truth. Not then. Not for years. The night my daughter was born, the rain came down in sheets so heavy it blurred the windows into streaks of silver. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so clean while everything inside me felt so tangled. Labor was long and quiet. No dramatic shouting. No movie-style chaos. Just hours of pressure, breath, pain folding in on itself. Daniel arrived late, smelling faintly of cologne and something metallic, like coins. He stood near the wall, hands in his pockets, watching as if he were waiting for a meeting to end. Marissa was the one who held my hand. She whispered to me through every contraction, counted my breaths when I forgot how, wiped my forehead with a cool cloth. When my body finally gave that last trembling push, and the room filled with a thin, urgent cry, she was the one who gasped first. "Oh God," she whispered. "Ellie, she's beautiful." They placed my daughter on my chest, slippery and warm and impossibly small. Her cry softened as soon as she felt skin. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for something familiar, something she already knew. I memorized her face in that moment. The faint crease between her brows. The tiny dark curl near her ear. The way her fingers wrapped around mine like a promise she didn't know she was making. I named her silently in my head, a name I had chosen years ago, long before Daniel, long before fear. But I never said it out loud. Daniel leaned in, kissed my cheek, murmured, "She's perfect," in a tone that sounded practiced. His eyes flicked briefly to Marissa, then away. Something passed between them, so fast I might have imagined it. 2 days later, the hospital room smelled of disinfectant and wilting flowers. Cards sat unopened on the windowsill. Daniel stood near the door, hands folded, his posture formal. The doctor spoke gently, using words like complications and long-term recovery. He said it would be best if I had help. A lot of it. That stress could worsen things. That my condition required stability. Daniel nodded at all the right moments. Then he said very calmly, "We've made arrangements." I turned my head toward him slowly. "What arrangements?" He cleared his throat. "Given everything, and the uncertainty around the paternity, it would be best if the baby stayed somewhere stable. Temporarily." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Temporarily," he repeated. "Until things are sorted." I looked at the doctor, then at the nurse, but their eyes slid away. They had already been told a version of this story. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You can't do that." Daniel lowered his voice. "Ellie, please. You're not well. This isn't about punishment. It's about what's best." "What's best for who?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Marissa was standing near the window, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She looked like she was trying not to cry. Daniel turned to her then. "You said you'd help," he said gently. "You said you'd support us." Her eyes widened. I meant support Ellie. I didn't." "You said you could take care of a baby," he interrupted smoothly. "You said you had the space. The time." She looked at me, panicked. "Ellie, I thought he meant helping for a few days. Maybe staying over." I didn't know. The room felt like it was tilting. I pushed myself upright, ignoring the ache in my body. "Marissa," I said softly. "Come here." She stepped closer, her face crumpling. I took her hands in mine. They were warm, familiar, safe. "You love her," I said. It wasn't a question. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Of course I do. And you'd keep her safe." "Yes," she whispered. "Always." Daniel shifted behind her. "Ellie, this doesn't have to be dramatic." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and something inside me went quiet and clear. I understood finally that whatever love I thought we'd shared had always come with terms. Conditions I'd never agreed to, rules I hadn't known I was playing by. If I fought him now, he would win. He had money, lawyers, his mother's name, his quiet influence. If I stayed, he would control everything. But if I let Marissa take her, my chest tightened so hard I thought I might pass out. I reached for my daughter. The nurse hesitated, then handed her to me. I held her close, breathing her in, the faint smell of milk and soap, the warmth of her cheek against my skin. "I'm so sorry," I whispered to her. "I'm so sorry, my love." She stirred, making a small sound, like a sigh. I lifted my eyes to Marissa. "You have to promise me something." She nodded frantically. "Anything." "You raise her with love," I said. My voice barely held together. "You tell her she's wanted, that she's precious. You never let her feel like a mistake." Marissa's sob broke free. "Ellie, please." "And you never tell her," I added quietly. "Not who I am. Not why. You let her believe the story he tells, if that's what keeps her safe." Daniel stiffened. "Ellie." I cut him off with a look that surprised even me. "This is the only way." Silence pressed in around us. Marissa shook her head, tears falling freely now. "I don't want to take her from you." "You're not taking her," I whispered. "You're carrying her for me. In your life. In your arms." My chest hurt so badly it felt like something tearing loose inside. I kissed my daughter's forehead. Once. Then again. I traced the tiny shell of her ear, memorizing it, burning it into myself. I love you, I breathed. I love you more than I know how to say. Then, with hands that barely obeyed me, I placed her into Marissa's arms. She made a small sound, like a question, then settled. Her head fit perfectly under Marissa's chin. Marissa gasped, clutching her close. Ellie. I couldn't look anymore. I turned my face to the wall. Daniel exhaled like a man relieved a difficult meeting had finally ended. Within an hour, papers were brought in. Words were spoken around me. Signatures placed. I barely remember the pen in my hand, only the weight in my chest and the echoing thought that this was the last moment my life would ever belong to me. They left together that afternoon. Marissa looked back once, standing in the doorway, eyes red, mouth trembling. Our eyes met. I nodded. That was all I could give her. The room felt impossibly quiet after they were gone. Too clean. Too empty. My arms ached as if something had been torn away. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain fade outside, and told myself over and over that this was love. That this was sacrifice. That someday, somehow, my daughter would be safe and happy, even if she never knew my name. I didn't know then how close I would stay. How many birthdays I would watch from the edges. How many lies I would swallow to keep the truth buried. Or how one small moment years later would crack everything open. The first time I saw her again, she was 3 months old. I hadn't planned it that way. I told myself I wouldn't go, that I needed distance, that watching from afar would only tear open wounds I was trying to stitch closed. But one afternoon, as I stood in my small rented room with its thin curtains and borrowed furniture, something inside me broke loose. A quiet urgency. A pull I couldn't explain. Marissa had moved to a modest house on the west side of town. Yellow siding, a narrow porch, wind chimes that sang when the breeze came through. I told myself I was only going to drive by. Just once. Just to see the place where my daughter slept. I parked across the street and sat there longer than I meant to, my hands wrapped around the steering wheel, my heart beating like it was afraid of being heard. Then the front door opened. Marissa stepped out, sunlight catching in her hair. She was holding a bundled shape against her chest. A soft blue blanket. A tiny cap. My breath caught. She sat on the porch swing and began to rock gently, humming something low and familiar. A tune her mother used to sing when we were girls, back when we believed life would turn out clean and fair if we were good enough. The baby stirred. My baby. Even from across the street, I knew her. The shape of her head. The way she tilted slightly to one side, like she was listening to the world before deciding how to answer it. Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. I pressed my fingers to my mouth, willing myself not to make a sound. That was the beginning. I became a quiet shadow in her life, always just outside the frame. I learned the rhythm of their days without ever stepping inside them. I knew which mornings Marissa walked her in the stroller, when the sun was still soft and the air smelled like wet grass. I knew which afternoons she took her to the park with the big oak tree and the chipped green bench. I knew the sound of my daughter's laugh before I ever heard her say a word. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I was protecting her. Years passed that way, me on the edges, pretending coincidence was enough. I took a job at a small bookkeeping office 2 streets over so I could walk past the house on my lunch break. I learned to time my errands so I'd catch glimpses of them at the grocery store, the library, the corner bakery. Marissa never saw me. Or if she did, she pretended not to. Daniel, on the other hand, disappeared almost entirely. He sent money, always on time, always impersonal, but he never showed up. His name was on paperwork, not on birthdays. On forms, not on bedtime routines. Marissa never spoke badly of him. She simply stopped mentioning him. By the time my daughter was 5, she called Marissa Mama, with the kind of certainty that comes from safety. The word fit her easily. It belonged to her. And every time I heard it, something inside me ached and softened at the same time. I told myself love wasn't about titles. I told myself presence mattered more than names. Still, there were moments when the ache came sharp and unexpected. Like the afternoon I saw them in the park, my daughter running ahead, curls bouncing, knees dusty. She tripped and scraped her palm on the sidewalk. She didn't cry right away. She just stood there, stunned. Marissa rushed to her, scooped her up, murmuring soft nonsense, kissing her knuckles, rocking gently. My daughter's face crumpled then, and she buried it into Marissa's shoulder with a sob that cut straight through me. I stood behind a tree, nails digging into my palms, telling myself to breathe. That's when I understood something painful and true. She wasn't missing me. She was loved. And that knowledge was both my comfort and my punishment. Years folded into each other quietly. My daughter, her name was Lila, grew into a thoughtful child with curious eyes and a habit of asking too many questions. She loved books, loved drawing, loved sitting cross-legged on the floor, humming to herself while she worked on puzzles. I learned all this from a distance, from overheard conversations at the library, from Marissa's occasional updates to mutual friends, from the way my heart recognized her laughter even before my ears did. Marissa never remarried. She worked hard, took extra shifts, built a life that revolved around Lila, and she did it with a gentleness that made people trust her instantly. Sometimes I wondered if she suspected the truth. There were moments, small, piercing ones, when our eyes would meet across a room at a school event or community gathering, and something unspoken would pass between us. A flicker, a question, a memory. But she never said anything. Neither did I. When Lila was 9, she performed in her school's winter play. I sat in the back row, tucked behind a taller man, my scarf pulled up around my neck. She stood on stage under bright lights, her voice clear and steady as she delivered her lines. My heart felt too big for my chest. At the end, the children bowed. Parents stood, clapping, cheering. Marissa wiped her eyes openly, pride shining on her face. I clapped too, quietly, my hands trembling. Afterward, in the crowded hallway, I saw Lila run straight into Marissa's arms, chattering excitedly. She looked so alive, so sure of her place in the world. That night, alone in my apartment, I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I regretted my choice, but because loving from a distance is a particular kind of loneliness, one that never quite dulls. As Lila grew older, the questions began. Marissa mentioned them once, carefully, over coffee at a mutual friend's house while Lila was in another room. "She's starting to ask about before," she said quietly. "About when she was born. About her father." My breath caught. "What do you tell her?" Marissa looked down at her cup. "The truth I'm allowed to tell. That he wasn't ready. that he chose not to be involved. And about her mother? I asked, my voice barely audible. She hesitated. I tell her her mother loved her very much, she said softly. That sometimes adults make choices because they think they're protecting someone. My chest tightened. Does she believe that? Marissa met my eyes then. Really met them. She believes there's more to the story. A quiet stretched between us. She's smart, Marissa added. She notices things. Like how she doesn't look much like me. The room seemed to tilt. I forced a small smile. She doesn't need answers yet. No, Marissa agreed. Not yet. But the seed had been planted. Lila grew into a teenager with opinions and fire in her voice. She was kind, but not naive. Curious in ways that made adults nervous. She asked harder questions. She wanted to know where she came from, why her paperwork looked different, why certain stories didn't quite line up. And every time she asked, Marissa carried the weight of my silence. I watched from afar as the gap between truth and protection stretched thinner. I saw it in the way Marissa's smile sometimes faltered, in the tired set of her shoulders. I saw it in Lila's eyes, searching for something she couldn't name. The moment that changed everything came on an ordinary afternoon years later, when I ran into Lila by accident. She was 19. I was standing in line at a small bookstore downtown, flipping through a used paperback, when I heard a voice behind me say, "Excuse me, sorry." I turned, and there she was, grown, taller than I expected. Her hair pulled back loosely, eyes bright and unmistakably familiar. My heart stopped. She looked at me with polite curiosity, nothing more. Just a stranger in her way. "Hi, sorry," she said again, stepping aside. Her voice sounded like a memory. "You're fine," I managed, my throat tight. She smiled, a quick, easy smile, and something inside me cracked wide open. For a second, I thought I might faint. She walked past me, completely unaware that the woman she had just apologized to had once held her before anyone else ever did. I stood there shaking, the book slipping from my fingers. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling felt too close. The air too heavy. My heart pounded with a truth I had been outrunning for nearly 2 decades. The secret was no longer just mine. It was starting to hurt her. And for the first time since the hospital room all those years ago, I began to wonder if silence was still the kinder choice. I didn't tell anyone about seeing her that day. Not Marissa. Not the friend who still checked in on me once a year. I carried it alone, the way I had carried everything else. But something had shifted. A quiet pressure settled in my chest, the kind that doesn't hurt right away but slowly steals your breath. Lila was no longer a child protected by not knowing. She was a young woman now, standing at the edge of her own life. And I could feel, with a certainty that frightened me, that the truth was circling closer to her whether I wanted it to or not. A few weeks later, Marissa called me. We hadn't spoken directly in years. Not since a strained exchange at a mutual friend's funeral, where grief made us briefly honest and then immediately careful again. When I saw her name on my phone, my hands began to shake so badly I had to sit down. "Ellie," she said softly when I answered. Her voice was older, tired in a way that carried weight. "Do you have a moment?" "Yes," I said, though my heart was already racing. "Of course." There was a pause. I could hear the faint hum of a refrigerator on her end. The sound of a home being lived in. She's been asking again, Marissa said. About you. I closed my eyes. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew. She found some old papers, she said. Hospital records. Nothing explicit, but enough to raise questions. Dates. Names. She's smart, Ellie. Too smart to let it go. My chest tightened. What did you tell her? I told her what I always do. That her story is complicated. That it began with love, even if it didn't look like it. Her voice wavered. But she wants to meet you. The words landed gently, and still they knocked the breath from my lungs. She, what? She saw you, Marissa said quietly. At the bookstore. She described you before I ever said your name. My fingers curled into the fabric of my skirt. What did she say? She said there was something familiar about you. That she felt drawn to you and didn't know why. A pause. She asked me if you were her mother. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. What did you say? I whispered. I said no, Marissa replied, her voice breaking. I told her you were someone from my past. A friend. I said she must have imagined the feeling. I pressed my hand to my mouth. A sob escaped despite my effort to hold it in. I hate lying to her, Marissa said. I always have. But I promised you. I know, I whispered. You've kept that promise longer than anyone should have had to. There was a long pause. Then she said very quietly, Ellie, she's hurting. Those two words undid me. She thinks something about her is missing, Marissa continued. That there's a piece of her story no one wants to give her. She's starting to think it's because she did something wrong. Tears slipped down my face. I let them fall. There was no point pretending anymore. I never wanted that, I said. I never wanted her to feel that way. I know, Marissa said. But we can't protect her from pain forever. Sometimes the truth hurts less than the silence. I stared at the wall, at a faint crack that ran from the ceiling down like a thin scar. My whole life had been built around one belief, that my absence was an act of love. That staying hidden was the price of her safety. But now I had to ask myself something harder. Was my silence still about her? Or had it become about my fear? That night, I barely slept. Memories came in waves. Her newborn weight in my arms, the smell of her hair, the way her fingers curled instinctively around mine. I thought about the years I had watched from a distance, convincing myself that distance was mercy. I thought about the woman she had become without knowing me. And I thought about the woman I had become because of that choice. By morning, my decision wasn't clean or confident, but it was there. I called Marissa back. If she wants to know, I said quietly, then she deserves the truth. But it has to be done carefully. Kindly. No blame. No drama. Marissa exhaled, a sound like relief and fear tangled together. Are you sure? No, I admitted. But I think I'm ready. We agreed to meet in a neutral place. A small cafe near the river where Lila sometimes studied. A place that felt ordinary enough not to turn the moment into something theatrical. The days leading up to it were some of the longest of my life. I chose my clothes carefully, not to impress, but not to hide. Simple. Soft. Familiar. I practiced sentences in my head, then abandoned them all. There were no perfect words for this. When the day came, I arrived early and sat at a small table by the window. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around my cup. Outside, people passed by laughing, talking, living their unknowing lives. I kept thinking, she's walking toward you right now. When the door finally opened and Marissa stepped in, my heart leapt. Lila followed a step behind her. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her. More sure of herself. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. Something in her expression shifted. Confusion first, then recognition, then something softer, deeper. "Hi," she said slowly, as if testing the word. "Hi," I replied, my voice barely steady. Marissa sat beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap. For a moment, none of us spoke. The air felt heavy with all the years pressed into it. Lila glanced between us. "You're the woman from the bookstore," she said. You're the one, aren't you?" I swallowed. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "I'm someone who has loved you your whole life," I said softly. Her brow furrowed. "That's not an answer." She was right. Marissa reached for her hand. "Sweetheart, there's something we need to tell you. And I need you to know, before anything else, that you are loved. Completely. Always have been." Lila looked at her, then back at me. Her voice trembled just slightly. Is she my?" I nodded, tears finally spilling free. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm your mother." The word hung between us, fragile and enormous. Her face drained of color. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, that's not. This isn't funny." "I know," I said quickly. "And I would never joke about this. I swear to you." She looked at Marissa, eyes wide and wounded. "Is this true?" Marissa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, baby. It's true." The silence that followed felt endless. Lila's chest rose and fell too fast. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You lied to me," she whispered. Marissa reached for her, but she pulled away. "You both did," she said, her voice breaking. "My whole life." "I know," I said, standing slowly. "And I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp with pain. "Then why did you leave?" The question landed like a blow. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Not the right ones. Not yet. All I could do was whisper the truth I'd carried for decades. "Because I thought loving you meant letting you go." Her face crumpled, confusion and anger and grief colliding at once. She turned away, pressing her hands to her face. "I need air," she said hoarsely. I can't." She rushed toward the door. Marissa started after her, but I shook my head. "Let her go," I said softly. "Please." We watched her disappear into the sunlight, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her. I sank back into my chair, my body suddenly heavy, exhausted beyond words. Marissa covered her face with her hands and began to sob. I reached across the table and took her hand, the same way I had all those years ago. "She knows now," I whispered. "Whatever comes next, at least she knows." Outside, life kept moving. Cars passed. People laughed. Somewhere, my daughter was walking through a truth that had waited nearly 20 years to find her. And I had no idea whether she would ever come back. The days after that meeting stretched into something hollow and quiet. Time moved, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. I woke, I ate, I went through motions, but everything inside me stayed fixed on one question I was too afraid to ask out loud. Had I lost her forever? Marissa called the next morning. Her voice was gentle, careful, as if every word might bruise something fragile. She hasn't said much, she told me. She barely slept. She skipped class yesterday. But she's thinking. I can see it. I closed my eyes. Is she angry? Yes, Marissa said honestly. And hurt. And confused. All of it at once. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. She has every right. There was a pause, then Marissa added quietly, she asked me something last night. My breath caught. What? She asked if you ever loved her. Tears welled before I could stop them. Every day, I whispered. Even when I pretended not to exist. I told her that, Marissa said. I told her you loved her enough to disappear. The line went quiet for a moment. Then she said, but Ellie, love like that leaves scars too. After we hung up, I sat alone at my small kitchen table, staring at the faint ring a coffee mug had left behind. That mark had been there for years. I'd never bothered to clean it properly. Somehow it felt like proof I'd been here long enough to leave something behind. I thought about all the years I had chosen silence because it felt safer than truth. About how easy it is to confuse endurance with virtue. How often women like me are praised for being strong when what we really are is afraid to take up space. 3 days passed. On the 4th, there was a knock at my door. It was soft, almost hesitant. My heart knew before my mind did. I stood slowly, every step heavy, afraid that if I moved too fast, the moment might vanish. When I opened the door, she was standing there. Lila, her hair pulled back loosely, eyes tired, jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of my own. For a second, neither of us spoke. I didn't come to fight, she said finally. Her voice wavered despite her effort to sound steady. I need to understand. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in, glancing around as if cataloguing the space. My small living room. The faded couch. The framed photos on the wall. Landscapes, old friends. Nothing that gave me away. You live quietly, she said. I gave a small, sad smile. I've had a lot of practice. She didn't smile back. She sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly between her knees. I remained standing for a moment, then sat across from her, leaving space between us. I keep replaying everything, she said. Every memory. Every time I felt like something didn't add up. And now I don't know what's real anymore. All of it was real, I said softly. The love. The care. None of that was a lie. Her eyes flicked up. But you were. The word stung, but I nodded. Yes. She swallowed. Why didn't you fight for me? The question landed deep, sharp, and deserved. I took a breath. Let it out slowly. Because I was afraid, I said. And because I thought I was protecting you. She shook her head. From what? From a man who had power and money and no mercy, I said. From a system that would have taken you away from both of us if I'd pushed back. From a life where every day would have been a battle you didn't choose. Her jaw tightened. So you chose for me. Yes, I whispered. And that's the part one will always carry. She looked away, eyes glossy. You don't get to decide that alone. I know, I said. I know that now. Silence settled between us, thick but not hostile. Outside, a car passed, tires humming against pavement. After a moment she asked very quietly, "Did you ever watch me?" My throat tightened. I nodded. From far away. I tried not to intrude. I just wanted to know you were okay. Her voice cracked. That's so unfair. I know. You got to love me without having to do the hard parts, she said, anger flaring. You didn't have to set rules or say no or mess up. I leaned forward, hands trembling. You're right. And I don't pretend that watching was the same as raising you. Marissa did the hard, everyday loving. She earned every mom you ever gave her. Her shoulders sagged at that. She's been crying non-stop, she admitted. She thinks I hate her. My heart twisted. Do you? No, Lila said quickly. God, no. I love her. I don't know where that leaves me now. I nodded slowly. That's the part no one prepares you for. When the truth doesn't erase love, but complicates it. She rubbed her arms, as if cold. I keep wondering what I'm supposed to call you. The question hung between us, delicate and dangerous. You don't have to call me anything, I said gently. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I don't need a title to care about you. She studied my face, searching for something. You really mean that? I do. Her eyes softened, just a little. We sat there for a long time after that, talking in pieces. She asked about my childhood, about what I liked to read, about whether I ever wanted more children. I answered honestly, but carefully, never pushing, never asking for more than she was ready to give. Before she left, she stood by the door, her hand resting on the knob. I don't forgive you, she said quietly. Not yet. I nodded. You don't have to. But, she hesitated. I don't want to lose you either. My breath caught. You won't, I said, though my voice shook. Not unless you choose to. She gave a small nod, then stepped out into the afternoon. After she left, I sank onto the couch and let myself cry. Softly, deeply, with a strange mix of grief and gratitude. Something had cracked open, yes. But something else had begun to heal. Weeks passed. Then months. Our connection grew slowly, carefully, like a bridge built plank by plank. Sometimes we met for coffee. Sometimes we just texted. Sometimes days went by without contact, and I learned to respect the quiet instead of fearing it. Marissa and I talked too, awkwardly at first, then more honestly. There were tears, apologies, long silences filled with meaning. We didn't try to rewrite the past. We just tried to stand inside the truth of it. One evening, Lila came by unannounced. She looked nervous, twisting her fingers together the way she did when she was overwhelmed. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said, about choice. I waited. She took a breath. I don't know what our relationship is supposed to look like, but I don't want to pretend you don't exist. Hope fluttered cautiously in my chest. She met my eyes. Can we start with coffee sometimes? Just talking. Tears welled before I could stop them. I'd like that very much. She hesitated, then added softly, and maybe, someday, you can tell me the whole story. From the beginning. I nodded, my voice barely steady. Whenever you're ready. As she left that night, I stood by the window and watched her walk down the street, her figure growing smaller under the streetlights. My heart still ached, but it was a different ache now. One threaded with possibility. For the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying my truth alone. And I understood something I hadn't before. Love doesn't always arrive clean or fair or on time. Sometimes it arrives late, limping, wrapped in regret. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. The first time she called me by my name without hesitation, it caught me off guard. Ellie, she said, standing in my doorway one afternoon a few weeks later, holding 2 paper cups of coffee like a peace offering. I didn't know what you drink, so I guessed. I smiled, my throat tightening. You guessed right. She stepped inside, glancing around the room like she was slowly allowing herself to belong to the space. We sat at the small table by the window, sunlight cutting soft lines across the floor. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. Her classes, her work, a book she was reading. The safe things. Then, gently, without drama, she asked, "Can you tell me about the day I was born?" I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. And I told her. Not all at once. Not with blame or bitterness. I told her about the rain, about the hospital room, about how small she was, how warm, about how she wrapped her fingers around mine as if she already knew me. I told her how afraid I'd been, how young, how trapped. I didn't make myself a hero. I didn't make anyone a villain. I told the truth as honestly as I could hold it. She listened quietly, elbows on the table, chin resting on her hands. Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. Not yet. When I finished, she sat back and let out a long breath. That must have been unbearable, she said. I shrugged gently. It was survivable. There's a difference. She nodded slowly, thinking. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. Do you ever regret it? The room went still. I thought of all the years, birthdays watched from afar, milestones learned secondhand, the ache of pretending I didn't recognize my own child in a crowd. I regret the pain, I said carefully. I regret the silence. I regret how lonely it made both of us. But I don't regret choosing love, even when I chose it badly. She considered that, turning her coffee cup between her hands. I think, she said slowly, I can understand that. I don't forgive everything yet. But I don't hate you. Something loosened in my chest, slow and fragile. That's more than enough, I whispered. From that day on, our relationship grew in small, imperfect steps. Sometimes she'd text late at night with a question she'd suddenly thought of. Sometimes weeks would pass without a word. I learned not to panic. I learned to let silence be part of the rhythm instead of a threat. Marissa and I began to talk more openly too. There were hard conversations, ones where we both cried, where old wounds surfaced. She admitted how heavy the secret had been, how lonely motherhood had felt even with love surrounding it. I told her how watching from the sidelines had hollowed me out. We didn't try to erase the past. We made room for it. One afternoon, months later, the 3 of us sat together at the same cafe where the truth had first cracked open. This time, the air felt different. Softer. less brittle. Lila laughed at something Marissa said. A real laugh, easy and warm. I watched them together, mother and daughter in every way that mattered. And instead of pain, I felt something close to peace. Later, as Marissa went to the counter, Lila turned to me. I've been thinking about something, she said quietly. About what to call you. I stayed very still. You don't have to call me anything. I know. She hesitated. But, would it be okay if I called you Ellie? For now. My eyes stung. Of course. She nodded, relieved. Then, after a moment, she added, almost shyly, maybe someday, something else. But not yet. I smiled through tears. Whenever you're ready. That night, walking home alone, I realized something important. Closure doesn't arrive with a clean ending or a perfect reunion. Sometimes it comes as permission, to breathe, to hope, to begin again in a smaller, quieter way. Years have passed since then. I'm older now. My hands are slower. My hair has gone almost entirely silver. But my life feels fuller than it ever did before. Lila visits when she can. Sometimes we cook together. Sometimes we argue. Sometimes we sit in companionable silence, each doing our own thing in the same room. She still calls Marissa Mom. And I wouldn't have it any other way. But sometimes, when she hugs me goodbye, she lingers a second longer. Sometimes she squeezes my hand before she lets go. Sometimes she says, softly, take care of yourself, okay? And in those moments, I feel it, the quiet recognition between us. Not ownership. Not obligation. Just connection. Love finally allowed to exist in its own shape. I don't pretend my choice was perfect. I don't wrap it in pretty language anymore. It was messy. It hurt people. It cost us time we can never get back. But I also know this. I made the best decision I could with the fear and knowledge I had at the time. And when the truth finally came into the light, we chose honesty over comfort, and tenderness over pride. If you're listening to this and carrying a secret you think is too heavy to share, I want you to know something. Silence can protect for a while. But truth, handled gently, can still heal, sometimes in ways you never imagined. And if you were standing where I once stood, holding love in one hand and fear in the other, would you have made the same choice? Before you go, I want to sit with you for just a moment longer. The way two people do when a story has settled into the room and neither wants to be the first to stand up. If you've listened this far, maybe it's because some part of this story brushed against your own life. Maybe you've carried a secret. Maybe you've made a choice you never fully explained. Or maybe you've loved someone in a way that required silence instead of credit. Life doesn't always give us clean options. Sometimes it asks us to choose between two kinds of pain, and we choose the one we believe will hurt the people we love the least. And then we live with that choice, quietly, bravely, imperfectly, for years. I used to think love had to look a certain way to be real. That it needed permission, titles, proof. But I've learned something softer and harder too. Love can survive in the background. It can wait. It can grow without being seen. And sometimes when the truth finally comes into the light, love doesn't explode. It simply takes a breath and keeps going, different but still alive. If this story touched you, I hope you'll take a moment to sit with your own truths. The ones you've hidden to protect others. The ones you've been afraid to name. You don't have to rush them. You don't have to solve them tonight. And if you feel comfortable, Tell me this. What would you say to your younger self, if you could speak to them now?